Ada for not tolerating my girlfriend's excuse of using her sign as an excuse for being rude. So, me, 34M, I've been dating my girlfriend, 38F, for about 2 years now. We got together not long after her divorce, a whirlwind romance that started as a beacon of hope for both of us during challenging times. She's a single mom, a dynamic I hadn't dealt with before, but I thought it added depth to her character. As someone who considers himself understanding and patient, I was ready to take on this new chapter in my life. At first, everything felt like a dream, the honeymoon phase, as they say, when every quirk is charming, every difference intriguing. But time has a way of peeling back layers, and what seemed quirky at first soon started to feel like red flags. And, looking back now, it wasn't just a fair, it was an entire carnival of issues I hadn't fully noticed. Here's where the main problem lies. She uses her horoscope sign as an excuse for her behavior. Now, I'm not one to dismiss someone's belief system out of hand. We all have our quirks, and who am I to judge? But with her, it felt less like a belief and more like a shield, a justification for every questionable action, every thoughtless comment. She's a Sagittarius, and she wears that label like a badge of honor. At first, I found it endearing, her passion for astrology, the way she talked about planets aligning and traits aligning with the stars. But over time, it began to feel like she was hiding behind it, using it as a reason not to reflect, not to grow. For example, she has this tendency to be brutally honest, not just honest, but brutally so, in a way that often left people around her wincing. Once, during a casual evening with some friends, she turned to one of my closest mates, a Samoan guy whose family culture embraces a larger build, and said, "You should stop ordering takeout. It's not a good look." The room fell silent for a moment before someone awkwardly changed the subject. Later, when I brought it up with her, hoping she might understand how insensitive it had been, she shrugged. "I'm a Sagittarius," she said, as if that explained everything. "I can't help it." This kind of attitude began to pop up more often as the months rolled on. She'd interrupt people mid-conversation, cutting them off with her own thoughts, sometimes completely unrelated to what was being discussed. She'd do it to me, too, and it reached a boiling point one day when I said, "Can you let me finish?" She just looked at me, unbothered, and said, "Sagittariuses are blunt. We just say what's on our mind." In my head, I was screaming, "Are you serious right now?" But I bit my tongue, trying to let it go. After all, everyone has their flaws, right? But it didn't stop there. She had a way of turning moments that weren't hers into ones that were all about her. One of our friends, a lovely woman in her early 30s, had just returned from her first international trip. She was practically glowing as she described her adventures in the Philippines, the beaches, the culture, the food. Everyone was listening intently, sharing her joy. Then, my girlfriend, with the subtlety of a freight train, cut in, saying, "Oh, I've been there multiple times. I even met this celebrity and ate at this amazing place." And just like that, the conversation shifted. Our friend's excitement was dimmed, her moment overshadowed. It was uncomfortable to watch, but my girlfriend seemed completely oblivious. I felt a twinge of embarrassment for her and for me, by extension. I tried to brush these things aside, telling myself that relationships require compromise. Nobody's perfect, and surely, if we loved each other, we could work through these issues. But as time went on, her behavior became harder to ignore. She wasn't just stepping on toes, she was stomping all over people's boundaries, mine included. And every time I brought it up, she'd fall back on her horoscope, as if being a Sagittarius was some immutable law of the universe that absolved her of all accountability. It felt like she was saying, "This is who I am, take it or leave it," and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. We were hanging out with our group of friends, and the mood was light, full of laughter and chatter. One of our friends, a woman in her early 30s, had just returned from her very first international trip, a vacation to the Philippines. She was practically glowing as she recounted the trip, her voice brimming with excitement as she described the pristine beaches, the vibrant culture, and the amazing food she'd tasted. Everyone was captivated, hanging on to her every word. It was clear how much this experience had meant to her. Then, as if on cue, my girlfriend cut her off mid-sentence. "Oh, I've been there multiple times," she declared, her tone loud and confident, effectively redirecting the spotlight. She didn't stop there. "I actually met this celebrity at one of the resorts there, and oh my god, the food at this one restaurant was unreal. Have you been to that place? No? You have to try it next time if you go again, that is." The energy in the room shifted. The friend, who had been so eager to share her joy, suddenly looked deflated. Her excitement was dimmed by the overwhelming presence of my girlfriend's anecdote, which had taken the conversation in a completely different direction. The rest of the group exchanged subtle glances, their expressions hard to read, part discomfort, part resignation. I stayed quiet, trying to mask my irritation. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It was just another example of how my girlfriend seemed incapable of letting someone else have their moment. And yet, despite my growing frustration, I told myself once again to let it slide. Relationships, after all, are about compromise. Nobody's perfect, right? But then came the potluck last weekend, and everything came to a head. Our friends had recently bought their first house, a significant milestone, and they wanted to celebrate with a small gathering. Everyone was asked to bring a dish to share, and I decided to make something special: Filipino adobo with beef short ribs. It was a recipe I'd perfected over the years, one that always earned me compliments at family gatherings. I put real effort into it, carefully choosing the ingredients, slow cooking the beef until it was tender, and making sure the sauce had just the right balance of savory and tangy. When we arrived at the party, the warm aroma of the dish drew a lot of attention. When it was time to eat, the adobo was an instant hit. People were going back for seconds, complimenting me on how flavorful and tender the beef was. I was feeling pretty good, proud of my contribution to the celebration. And then, as if on cue, my girlfriend decided to chime in. "It's not bad," she said, pausing dramatically before adding, "but it's obvious you didn't really follow the recipe, right?" Typical Aries, always trying to wing it instead of taking your time to make it perfect. Her words cut through the jovial atmosphere like a knife. The room went quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that makes your stomach drop. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, waiting to see how I would respond. My heart sank, and a wave of frustration surged through me. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "If you don't like it," I said evenly, "you don't have to eat it." Instead of taking the hint, she doubled down. "You don't have to be so sensitive," she replied, rolling her eyes. "You should know how Sagittariuses are by now. We're just honest, and I'm not going to lie just to make you feel good. It's not like I said it was bad." Her words felt like a slap in the face, not because of the criticism but because of the way she dismissed my feelings entirely. Once again, she was using her horoscope as a shield to justify her behavior, as if being a Sagittarius gave her carte blanche to be rude and inconsiderate. I could see our friends exchanging awkward glances, clearly uncomfortable with the tension that had suddenly filled the room. I wanted to call her out right then and there, but I didn't want to ruin the night for our hosts. So, I bit my tongue, took another deep breath, and let the moment pass. The ride home, however, was another story. The silence in the car was deafening, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. I kept my responses short and curt, hoping she'd pick up on my mood and drop the subject. But of course, she couldn't let it go. "What's your problem?" she asked finally, her tone sharp and defensive. "Why are you being so quiet?" I didn't answer right away, trying to find the right words to express my frustration without letting it devolve into an argument. But before I could respond, she rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, Let me guess. You're mad about what I said at the party, right? You know I'm a Sagittarius. I'm not going to sugarcoat things. And that's when I cracked. You can't keep using your stupid horoscope to justify being disrespectful to people, I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. It's not an excuse to be rude or inconsiderate. People have feelings, and you can't just trample all over them and then hide behind your zodiac sign. She scoffed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. You don't understand, she shot back. This is who I am. Small comments like that shouldn't bother a real man. Her words stung, but it was the dismissiveness in her tone that really pushed me over the edge. Before I knew it, the words were out of my mouth, words I knew I couldn't take back even as I said them. This is why your marriage failed, I snapped. Your ex-husband gave up because he couldn't deal with your crap anymore. And it's no wonder your daughter ran away to live with him. The look on her face was a mix of shock and fury, and for a moment, I thought she might hit me. Instead, she unleashed a torrent of angry words, accusing me of being insensitive, insecure, and weak. I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I turned on my heel and walked straight to my office/game room, slamming the door behind me. The fallout was immediate. She's been distant ever since, barely speaking to me unless absolutely necessary. Her friends have been blowing up my phone, sending me angry messages and telling me that I was out of line, that I need to apologize and let her be herself. Meanwhile, a couple of my own friends have patted me on the shoulder and given me the silent nod of approval, as if to say, we get it, man. But now I'm left with this overwhelming sense of uncertainty. Part of me feels justified in calling her out, in standing up for myself and refusing to tolerate her behavior any longer. But another part of me wonders if I crossed a line, if the things I said were too harsh, too unforgivable. I'm at a crossroads, unsure whether to try and salvage the relationship or cut my losses and move on. All I know is that these red flags are no carnival, and I'm not sure how much more I can take. The moment we got home, the tension that had been simmering throughout the car ride spilled over. I didn't want to argue in the car, where every word could echo in the small, enclosed space, intensifying the awkwardness. But once we walked through the door, it was like the dam broke. She couldn't leave it alone, couldn't let it sit and give us both time to cool off. Instead, she followed me around, demanding to know why I was upset, why I wasn't talking to her like normal. Are you seriously still mad about what I said at the party? She asked, her voice tinged with annoyance rather than concern. It wasn't even that bad. You're overreacting. I tried to ignore her, setting my keys on the counter and taking off my shoes, but she wasn't about to drop it. Come on, she pressed, standing in the doorway of the kitchen as I grabbed a glass of water. You're not seriously going to let one little comment ruin your night, are you? I'm a Sagittarius, you know that. I'm not going to sugarcoat things just to make people feel good. I don't know what it was about that moment. Maybe it was the way she rolled her eyes as if I were being unreasonable, or the way she dismissed my feelings entirely, yet again, with her horoscope excuse. Maybe it was the culmination of 2 years of small slights, of biting my tongue and brushing off her behavior. Whatever it was, something inside me snapped. Do you hear yourself? I said, my voice sharp and laced with frustration. You can't keep using your stupid horoscope as a free pass to be disrespectful and inconsiderate to people. It's not quirky, it's not cute, and it sure as hell isn't an excuse to treat everyone around you like crap. She stared at me, her arms crossed defensively, but I could see the fire in her eyes, the anger simmering just below the surface. Wow, she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. So I'm the bad guy because I'm honest? Because I don't sugarcoat things like you and your overly sensitive friends apparently need me to? Give me a break. If you were a real man, you wouldn't let small comments like this get to you. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. A real man. The phrase echoed in my head, poking at every insecurity I'd ever had, every doubt I'd ever carried. And as much as I tried to keep my cool, I could feel my control slipping. A real man, I repeated, my voice rising. You think this is about being a real man? This is about basic respect, something you clearly don't have for anyone including me. She scoffed, shaking her head as if I were the one being unreasonable. Oh, please. You're blowing this way out of proportion. It's not my fault you're too sensitive to handle the truth. I didn't say your adobo was bad, did I? I just pointed out that it wasn't perfect. But no, you had to take it personally because you can't handle criticism. Criticism. I shot back, my frustration boiling over. What you do isn't criticism. It's tearing people down just for the sake of it. You don't offer advice or constructive feedback, you just say whatever pops into your head, no matter how rude or hurtful it is, and then you hide behind your Zodiac sign like it's some kind of get-out-of-jail-free card. Newsflash, being a Sagittarius doesn't mean you get to treat people like crap. Her face hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line as her eyes narrowed. You don't understand, she said, her voice cold. This is who I am. I'm not going to change just because you're too weak to handle it. And that's when I hit the point of no return. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, harsh and unforgiving, but in that moment, I didn't care. This is why your marriage failed, I said, my voice sharp and cutting. Your ex-husband probably got sick of dealing with your crap, just like I am. And it's no wonder your daughter ran away to live with him. Who could blame her? The second the words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed a line. Her face crumpled, a mix of shock, hurt, and fury flashing across her features in rapid succession. For a brief moment, the room was completely silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. And then she exploded. How dare you? She spat, her voice trembling with rage. You have no idea what you're talking about. You don't know what I went through in my marriage, or what I've done for my daughter. How dare you throw that in my face like it's some kind of weapon? I dare because it's the truth, I shot back, my anger still blazing. You act like you're this amazing, honest person, but all you do is push people away. You're so wrapped up in yourself and your stupid horoscope that you don't even see how toxic you've become. She was yelling now, hurling insults and accusations that I barely registered because my own anger was so loud in my head. Words flew back and forth, sharp and cutting, neither of us willing to back down. It was like a storm raging through the room, destructive and chaotic, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned on my heel and stormed off to my office/game room, slamming the door behind me. I needed to get away, to cool off before I said something even worse. Sitting in the silence of my office, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. I replayed the argument in my head, the things I'd said, the things she'd said. I felt a pang of guilt for bringing up her ex-husband and daughter, for hitting her where I knew it would hurt the most. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling of righteous anger, the sense that she needed to hear those things, even if they were harsh. The house was quiet now, the only sound the faint hum of the heater. She wasn't banging on the door, wasn't yelling anymore. I didn't know if she'd gone to bed or if she was sitting in the living room, stewing in her own anger. Either way, the silence was deafening. The next morning, she was distant, her face a mask of cold indifference. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, her words were clipped and laced with bitterness. It was clear that we were both still reeling from the fight, unsure how to move forward. And then the messages started. Her friends, who must have heard her side of the story, began bombarding me with texts and calls, accusing me of being cruel and unkind, telling me that I owed her an apology. One message in particular stood out: if you can't accept her for who she is, then you don't deserve her. I wanted to respond, to defend myself, but what was the point? Her friends had already made up their minds about me, just as I was starting to make up my mind about her. A couple of my own friends, the ones I confided in, gave me their quiet support, a pat on the shoulder, a knowing nod. They didn't say much, but their silent approval spoke volumes. Now I'm sitting here, trying to figure out what comes next. Do I try to salvage this relationship, to work through the issues that seem insurmountable? Or do I cut my losses and walk away, knowing that some things can't be fixed? All I know is that the person I thought I loved feels like a stranger now, and I'm not sure how much more I can take. In the days that followed, the house felt like a war zone. Not the kind where battles raged openly, but the kind where silence hung heavy in the air, oppressive and suffocating. She barely spoke to me, retreating into her own bubble of simmering anger, and I did the same. I didn't know how to bridge the gap, or if I even wanted to anymore. The things we'd said to each other during that fight replayed in my mind on an endless loop, each harsh word cutting deeper with every repetition. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd said about her ex and her daughter. Part of me felt justified, it wasn't like I'd lied. But another part of me, the part that still cared about her, regretted hitting below the belt. Bringing up her daughter had been especially cruel, and I knew it. No parent wants to hear that they've failed their child, no matter how true it might feel in the heat of an argument. Her friends, of course, had taken her side. They flooded my phone with texts, calling me insensitive and cruel, telling me I needed to apologize and accept her for who she was. If you can't handle her honesty, maybe you're the problem, one of them wrote. Another chimed in, she's always been this way. Why did you even date her if you couldn't handle it? It was infuriating. They didn't know the full story, they only knew her version, the one where I was the villain and she was the misunderstood victim. I wanted to respond, to defend myself, but I knew it would be pointless. These were her friends, after all. They weren't going to see things from my perspective, no matter what I said. On the flip side, a couple of my friends, those who had seen her behavior firsthand, gave me their quiet support. They didn't say much, just a pat on the shoulder or a knowing look that said, "We get it, man." It was reassuring in a way, but it didn't make the situation any less complicated. For days, we tiptoed around each other, speaking only when absolutely necessary. The silence was unbearable, but neither of us was willing to make the first move. She seemed to be waiting for an apology, and I didn't know what I was waiting for. A sign, maybe, that this relationship was still worth fighting for. Then one evening, as I sat alone in my office/game room, staring blankly at the screen, it hit me. I wasn't happy. I hadn't been happy in a long time. The relationship that had once felt so full of promise now felt like a weight dragging me down, draining me of energy and joy. Every argument, every hurtful comment, every excuse she made for her behavior, it had all chipped away at the foundation of what we'd built together. And now, there was nothing left but resentment and exhaustion. I realized then that I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep walking on eggshells, waiting for the next blow-up, the next fight where she would use her horoscope as a shield and her words as weapons. I couldn't keep making excuses for her or for myself, pretending that things would get better if I just tried a little harder. The next morning, I decided to have the conversation. It wasn't easy. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, her expression unreadable. I took a deep breath and sat down across from her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. She looked up at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "About what?" "About us," I replied. "About where we're going, or if we're going anywhere at all." She set her phone down, crossing her arms over her chest. "Oh, so now you want to talk?" After ignoring me for days. I ignored the jab, focusing on what I needed to say. "I've been thinking a lot about our relationship," I began, choosing my words carefully. "And I've come to the conclusion that this isn't working. We're not happy. I'm not happy. And I don't think you are either." Her expression hardened. "So that's it? You're just giving up?" "It's not about giving up," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. It's about recognizing when something isn't healthy for either of us. We've been fighting more and more, and it's clear that we're not on the same page. I think it's better for both of us if we go our separate ways. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she scoffed, shaking her head. Of course you'd say that. You can't handle a strong woman. You can't handle someone who's honest and real. You'd rather be with someone who'll stroke your ego and tell you what you want to hear. Her words stung, but I refused to let them derail me. This isn't about you being a strong woman, I said firmly. It's about respect. It's about treating each other with kindness and understanding. And that's something we've been missing for a long time. She glared at me, her eyes flashing with anger. You're just like everyone else, she said bitterly. You couldn't handle me, so you're walking away. I didn't respond to that. There was no point. Instead, I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Over the next few days, we went through the motions of ending things, dividing up our belongings, figuring out who would take what. It was painful, but also liberating in a way. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity, a sense of relief. Her friends, of course, were quick to paint me as the bad guy, but I didn't care. I knew the truth, and that was enough. My own friends rallied around me, their support helping me through the tough moments. In the end, I realized that sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, no matter how much you care about someone, the differences between you are too great to overcome. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you failed, it just means you're human. As I packed up the last of my things and closed the door behind me, I felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. Sadness for what we'd lost, but hope for what lay ahead. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. And that, I realized, was worth everything.